In fact, the author of that report, Ritika Mankar Mukherjee, senior economist at Ambit Capital, joins in with her perspective. Maithili Busarmat, consulting editor, ET Now, also joins in to take that discussion forward. Good afternoon to both of you. And Maithili, from whatever you have read of the report, do you see that, there's so much talk about how, a favorable age for the productive group within the population of the country is likely to help India going forward, and that's really been has been the world's envy when it comes to India. This report gives a very contra view on that. Firstly, prima facie, what are your own observations from what the report is highlighting?
Well, Tanvi, in fact, this point about the demographic dividend turning into a liability is a point that has been made earlier as well, because the fact is that unless we give jobs to our youngsters, the dividend that we are hoping to achieve would become a liability. So this is a point that has been made, in fact, very often in the past, and that is why the entire focus on this Make in India, the entire focus on jobs, because if you have jobless growth, they are not going to get the kind of dividend that you were hoping for. So I think this point really has been made before. So what I would, in fact, more be intrigued is how Ambit really arrived at the number of 6.8%, because the fact is that the CSO, at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, has far more resources at its disposal. So whatever numbers they arrive at, one might quarrel with the methodology, but clearly their access to resources, their access to data should be better than that of any private entity. So I'm a little intrigued by how they got that 6.8 number. So maybe I can start by asking Ritika, how did Ambit get that number? Because RBIS, in a report that they had brought out recently, they also mentioned 6.8, but that was in fact as per the earlier series, not the new series. So the numbers are not strictly comparable. So I just want to check with Ritika, the 6.8 number that you have, is that as per the old series, or is it as per the new series, Ritika?
Right. So unfortunately, Maithili, that number is as per the new series, and the reason why we think 6.8 more appropriately reflects actual growth dynamics in the country versus the lofty 7.6 the CSO highlights. I think there's two ways of explaining that number, because like you rightly said, clearly I don't have the resources at hand that the CSO has. First and foremost, an interesting trend that we picked up from multiple years of CSO GDP data is that typically the first estimate tends to overestimate GDP growth when it comes on the back of an acceleration. So let me intuitively explain what I'm saying. So say for instance, FY15 saw GDP growth accelerate versus FY14. So your number came in at 7.2%. What typically happens when the GDP is estimated by the CSO for FY16 is that there is an overestimation bias, because remember, the first estimate is based on a large degree of extrapolation as opposed to actual ground level data, and consequently what we've seen is that in subsequent estimates this overestimation gets corrected. So point number one is I am adjusting for the fact that there is likely to be a degree of overestimation that has taken place in the advanced estimate that the CSO put out, and subsequent estimates are likely to tend towards my 6.8% number as per the new series. The second way of explaining how I arrive at 6.8% is basically that we have a supply side GDP growth model which we run basis certain explanatory variables such as the economic environment, ability to raise equity capital in the market, kind of monsoons that you got in FY16, similarly what's the kind of revenue expenditure that the central government is pumping into the economy, and the combination of those explanatory variables helps me forecast the FY16 number. So you're right in the sense that unlike the CSO's number, which is broadly based on actuals, my number is a forecast driven by certain explanatory variables such as those that are highlighted. But I think this is the point that's critical to note. That the first estimate often gets the actual GDP growth number wrong, and it's my duty to my investors to let them know that eventually this number seems likely to be revised downwards, but by the time that happens we'll probably be in FY17, and the essence is to highlight this issue at this point.
Well, Ritika, put it down to my grey hair perhaps, but the fact is that yes, in the past, GDP estimates have come down, have been lowered, but it's also true that GDP estimates have all gone up. In fact, 2009-10 was 8-9-9-10 were the years when in fact GDP estimates were revised upwards, which is why the Reserve Bank of India former governor often said that we never had the indication that the economy was overheating. So we reacted with a delay. So if you get GDP numbers more correctly and more timely, you can take correct decisions. And as far as GDP numbers are concerned, it's not just the CSO, but internationally, in fact, including in the US, GDP estimates are revised very often. And yes, you're right, more often down than up. But up is not, a complete no-no. So at the moment, I will reserve my judgment. We'll have to wait because at the end of the day, the CSO does go by actuals, whereas models, in fact, are always suspect. I'm very skeptical about models because models are essentially a result of what you put into your models. So since CSO goes by actuals, I will at the moment go more with CSO. Yes, I'm not saying 7.6 is sacrosanct, but I'm not sure the 6.8 is very much better either. For at the moment, I think the jury will have to remain out and we'll have to see what the position is. Essentially because we really don't hold the back series also entirely. So as far as GDP is concerned, yes, the indications are not very definite, but one could say that maybe it's not 7.6, maybe it's a little less, but I would hesitate to put a number to that. And my second question really to you is, as far as the fact that India is growing in a very disparate way geographically is also fairly well known, because the fact is that India is essentially almost like two countries. You could put a line dividing the west and the south, and you could put east and central India, north India on one side. So there again, is there anything really new that you have highlighted? Because I'm sure you've done a great deal of work and it's an excellent report. But as far as the socio-economic dynamics, as far as the south is concerned, they've always been better than the north. And even as far as the north is concerned, it is not as if the north is one uniform basket, because even within the north, the Bimaru states, Rajasthan has made spectacular improvement as compared to earlier. So can one really assume that the past is going to be the best indicator of the future? Depending on, what kind of government you have, what kind of enlightened government you have, things can change. So is there anything really new by way of an insight which I might perhaps have missed in a, hasty reading of your report?
You're right. So I think you're absolutely right in saying that, look, we all knew that from a per capita income basis, the north was not as well off as the south. I guess from a numbers perspective, the north roughly has a per capita income of about $1,100, which means that it's actually a low income country, while South India obviously has much higher per capita income levels of close to $2,200. While we knew all of that, I think two important things have panned out literally over the last 2 years. First and foremost, what we have found out from the latest census of 2011, in fact, is that the gender ratio for North India actually deteriorated mightily from 2001 to 2011, which is a total shocker to the extent that, remember, the assumption so far was that, hey, while North India has worse gender ratios than South India, as per capita incomes increase, broadly the gender ratios should pick up. But that was development number one that we really got a hang of once we got the state level data. The gender ratios have deteriorated in North India over the noughties after having recorded improvements over the 90s. And if you hang on for a second, I'll just add on to this to help you explain why this is important. The other big development that has panned out is that we have a government in power which has seen a steady rise in communal risks in India. Now, why both of these developments become very important for the northern region is simply because, remember, North India accounts for 45% of the Indian populace, a majority of which is extremely young. On top of that, this region suffers from very poor youth employment rates. This region also suffers from very poor literacy and skill rates for the youth, which basically means there isn't that much potential in terms of providing this youth a meaningful employment. And add to that, that not only are social indicators much worse off than the rest of South India, but remember, gender ratio is one example of a social indicator actually deteriorating. So all of this put together makes us extremely worried that going forward, as you particularly have state elections in two very, very volatile states historically, namely Uttar Pradesh and Punjab in CY17, all of this could turn into a tinderbox situation, which is a high youth populace that largely does not have jobs that help them meet their aspirations, that's largely engaged in the agricultural sector. Remember, in North India, even today, 60% of the populace is working in the agricultural sector. They don't have jobs, they don't have a great education, there aren't enough women in that cohort, that youth cohort especially. All of this combined with the fact that you have elections in fairly volatile states like Uttar Pradesh and Punjab could result in a fairly tinderbox situation, which will obviously mean that conflict risk goes up in that region. So I think that's the core point that my report is trying to convey, that while we knew that North India is dealing with a level of economic destitution not seen in the rest of India, it's dealing with social indicator level destitution not seen in the rest of India. However, the fact that the two are coming together, social indicators are worsening, agriculture is under stress, and you have state elections in Punjab and Uttar Pradesh due next year, could result in a fairly high conflict risk situation.
Ritika, I would hesitate to make these generalizations for two reasons. Because North India is not one uniform, all their social economic indicators are not uniform. They vary hugely across states. And as you've seen in many states, including that of Rajasthan, literacy levels have actually improved and improved dramatically. Maybe because they started with a low base, but I really am not so, skeptical about North India. And as far as being a tinderbox and volatile, I assure you Punjab and UP are no more volatile than the rest of the country. The fact is that we are a poor democracy, and in a poor democracy, social tensions do come up to the surface. In a way, it's very good, because unlike in China, if you're unhappy in India, you make your unhappiness known, and to the extent that you make it known and you feel you can make it known, that's much like a pressure valve. It's like a pressure cooker. Every time the pressure builds up, you have it, the steam escaping. So that's why in India you have these checks and counter checks. So I would not think of Punjab and UP being any more volatile than the rest of the country. Yes, socio-economic indicators are worse in the north, but if you look at the GDP growth rates, in fact, these states have done dramatic catch-up with the rest of the south. And that again is inevitable, because as your income levels rise, your rate of growth comes down. So in fact, there is this great deal of argument about convergence. So I really am less skeptical about North India. And as yes, job opportunities are less as far as any part of the country which is growing slower. But mind you, while goods and services perhaps cannot move freely in this country, particularly goods, because we have things like octroi, etc. As far as movement of people is concerned, there is no bar at all, which is why you find in places like Maharashtra and South India, if you go to South India, most of the labor now comes from Bihar, Jharkhand, and places like that. So as far as there is labor mobility, I don't think one need worry that much, because there will be a certain movement of income levels toward a certain mean. Yes, there will be differences, but it's like Kerala. What did they do? How did Kerala become prosperous? Because they exported human labor to the Middle East. So likewise, you will find Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, etc. exporting human labor to the rest of the country. And there are no visa restrictions in moving anywhere in the rest of the country, unlike if you want to move to Dubai and the Middle East, where there are certain requirements as far as visa are concerned. So I'm much more optimistic about India and much less pessimistic as far as North India is concerned. Yes, it is behind South India at the moment, but it's only a matter of time. And I think if you have enlightened leadership, and again you spoke about the sex ratio, but mind you, even though Bihar doesn't have a very good sex ratio, what has happened in Bihar? The Chief Minister Nitish Kumar has been forced to accede to a demand made by the women folk. So the women are getting empowered. So I'm much more optimistic as far as North India is concerned, even though I am a South Indian, right? So I'm much more optimistic about North India, and I'm much less pessimistic about the prospect of North India catching up with the South. Things are bad, but they're not that bad. If you have enlightened leadership, if you have an active civil society, I think there's no reason why we should write it off.
Right. I think the critical point to note here, while you raise a number of very valid points, is that while we tend to be optimistic about North India for the range of reasons that you highlighted, I think an objective analysis of the numbers tells you how that optimism doesn't really add up from a numbers perspective. So number one, like you rightly said, that while labor mobility is not a problem in the country, if you look at the migration data, north versus south, you will see that while on one hand there is this massive unemployment problem that plagues North India, the other more worrying trend is that you're systematically seeing outflow of productive, educated migrant labor moving from North India to South India. So actually the mobility is working against North India because those who are educated, fit for the non-farm sector are actively choosing on a net basis to move down south to South India. Secondly, I think there's also a lot of rhetoric around, a lot of showmanship around how Bihar is doing great on the growth front, or say on a couple of other northern states as well. If you look at the actual GSDP data from these states for the last 3 years, Maithili, you will be surprised to know that aggregate GSDP growth for North India was recorded at 6.1% for the last 3 years that the data is available, while the corresponding number was 6.7% for South India. So I guess what's important to note is that even despite coming off a fairly low base, it isn't as if North India is beating South India on growth. And like I said, I think the biggest point to note here is that let's look at countries like Brazil, for instance. All of these countries also had the right kind of ratios, a lot like North India, before they made their entry into the middle income level from the low income level. But the reason why they stagnated in the middle income level is just simply because their social indicators were not able to grow at the same pace that their economic indicators were growing. So I think that's the big risk that we're highlighting, that while the fundamentals are clearly in place, you will unlikely be able to realize this potential unless you're able to educate the youth, you're able to provide them the right kind of jobs, and you're able to provide them the right kind of income that can help them meet their aspirations.
Ritika, great points, and thanks very much for that report. We're completely running out of time. Maithili, thanks very much for that discussion. We're completely running out of time. Just want to slip in a 30-second view on the currency, because that slipped to a 4-week low. So, I know I'm getting you out of a very interesting debate, but, just on the basis of this news development that's come in, a 4-week low on the rupee, do you think that there's perhaps more weakness?
Sure. So I think this is a point we've been consistently making to clients for a systematic period of time, that while fears on the current account deficit need not be at large at this point in time, we will stay around the 1.3–1.4% of GDP range on the current account deficit front. The problems are likely to be from a funding perspective, which is the capital account surplus front. Remember, the last 2 years saw record private equity and venture capital money coming into the e-commerce and ITES sector, and we are hearing increasing reports which suggest that that momentum is not going to be maintained going forward. Number two, remember, even portfolio inflows, we're entering a very, very uncertain economic environment. Large part of the world is dealing with negative interest rates, which is
completely
going to affect the banking
Where do you
system,
peg,
particularly
where do you peg the range for the currency, Ritika?
So I think we don't have a range-based forecast, but I won't be surprised if there is more depreciation pressure on the currency even from this point in.
Maithili would be happy to hear that. All right, Maithili as well as Ritika, thanks very much for taking out the time. A really interesting report out there, and good points that both of you raised on that. We'll take a break then. When we come back, it's full focus on the equity markets. Ultratech is going to be coming out with numbers, so talk about some key previews and the internals of the market as always.